my wife, Lisa. Hello, nice to meet you.
How are you?
Hold on, let me get the microphone first.
Hello, welcome everyone. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Humanities Institute, who co-sponsors this event.
It's not working.
It's not working? Here we go. Okay, thanks. So on behalf of the Humanities Institute and Acting Director Kathleen Wilson, I would like to welcome you to today's great debate. We have some refreshments for you after the debate, so please just go across the hallway. We had some great events this semester, including a talk by Mark Van here about coastlines, which reminds me very much of today's talk. But to welcome our panel, please give a welcome to Dr. Bauman from SOMAC.
Thank you. Thanks, Ignacio. My job, my role in this afternoon's debate is called the parliamentary whip. In other words, I got it all to happen today, and I just want to show my appreciation to the debaters, and Professor Klurfeld will introduce him in a moment. So this is what we're doing today is what's called a parliamentary debate. It's not like one of those phony presidential debates which are really heavily controlled, orchestrated Q&As. But this is in front of you. You'll see two-sided sheet I gave out, which basically shows you the rules as it's according to the American Parliamentary Debating Association. And it goes back to Oxford University in England, where there's a very famous debating club, where not only students but world leaders debate. And so the rules are quite clear in front of you, and I think you're going to enjoy this. What I want to say really is we encourage audience participation, but only in a clever, witty way. In other words, if you're feeling elated, you might yell out, "Awesome!" So let me hear you all yell, "Awesome!"
Awesome!
Or if you're bored, you might start yawning. I want to hear you all yawn.
Wow.
Okay.
I want you to do that when they speak.
So this is supposed to be educational, but also fun. So if you've got a witty comment, and you feel it's going to make people laugh and sharpen the debate, just feel free to say a couple words. But it's got to be controlled, and the Speaker of the House, Mr. Klurfeld in the middle, will keep control of the event. If he fails, then I'll take over. So at the end of the debate, you, the audience, will vote the winner. It says on the sheet there that the Speaker of the House, but that's not democratic enough. So you will vote, and the Speaker will take the vote. And as I like to say, there are really no winners and losers. This is an educational experience. We're all going to learn something, and so it's going to be fun. Now, to start the event off, I've just asked my colleague, Professor Charlie Flagg over there on the far side, who is an oceanographer. He is the authority on this Fire Island breach. And just so we know what we're talking about, and you know what we're talking about, Charlie's just going to spend no more than 5 minutes showing a few slides. Charlie is an oceanographer. He's also a pilot. He flies his own plane, and he's taken a number of aerial photographs of this inlet that was created by Superstorm Sandy as it's evolved over the months and now well over a year since it was formed. So Charlie will lead you through some pictures that he took. Also, he's on the ground or in the water measuring the flow in and out of the inlet. He is the authority. He will not participate in this debate. But when the debate's finished and you have voted the winning team, Charlie, I'll invite Charlie to come sit at the front here, and he can be part of the panel. And that's the chance for you to have Q&A with the panel and to hear perhaps what they really think, not just their political stances. So Charlie, welcome Professor Charlie Flagg.
Okay, so I'm here to just sort of set the stage and not take a position. So as Malcolm has pointed out, we've been measuring things at the breach or the inlet, depending upon your political stance, ever since it opened up. For those who aren't quite aware of where this breach is, it's here at the eastern end of Great South Bay, about 3 miles to the west of Smith Point. Christ, can't even see. All right, here we go. All right, so this is what the area of the old inlet looked like prior to the breach. In the center there is Pelican Island that used to have a house on it that was from the Pattersquash Gun Club. The breach is going to happen right through here. We've also been measuring things at Bellport Dock, which is about 3 miles to the north of the breach. And so this is a record showing the sea level in this red plot. This is the sea level at Bellport. And you can see that here, right before the breach opened up, this water level was about 0. Here the mean water level jumped up to a little over 1.5 meters above mean water level, rose up at about 1 foot an hour. It also brought in oceanic water, and that's what this dotted line is, showing the salinity. And the salinity in the bay increased at about 2 parts per thousand per hour, which is rather remarkable. So there was a real wash of water that came straight across the bay. This is what the inlet looked like 3 days after it was formed. It goes straight across the island and exits a little bit to the east. Now, as time went on, we had this inlet got bigger and moved to the west. And so this is a picture, a photo mosaic from the air in March. So this is November, December, January, February, March, nearly 5 months after the breach was formed. A couple of important things. Most of the sand that was in this formed part of the island, it was blown into the bay, into what's called the flood delta. There is also an ebb shoal. This is sand that has been washed out, and it forms an ebb shoal here. So what you'll see is that the breach is going to get bigger, and it's going to work its way back to here. And there are changes that happen right up there. So this is we're going to step through things. So this is in April of 2013. These pictures are about a month apart. This is in May, and now the breach is retreated, but there's also this sand spit on the west. So now we're in the summertime. This is June, July, August. This is August and September. And then we had some fall storms that came in, and they started changing things rather dramatically. And you'll notice that the inlet has eroded on the west, and you can see this dark area, and it sort of goes across there. That's the main channel, exit channel for the inlet. This is in November, December. You can see that there's been quite a bit of erosion on that west side. The east side of the channel doesn't move around very much. Okay, here is January. Now things begin to change. For the first time, we've got accretion on the west side, over here. We have shoals that are building up and accretion over here on the west side. So that was in February. This is in March. And so the accretion has increased. Let's see if I can get back to the other thing. And, whoops, what happened with it? Okay. I seem to have, in my rush, I've missed a picture, but the accretion is solidified, and so that's, in a year and a half, the first time that the west side has started moving east is in the last 2 months. Okay, so what was the impact of the breach? These show the tide ranges of the main semi-diurnal tide before and after Sandy at various places where we have records. And you can see that the before blue and the after red are essentially the same. And they're all substantially less than what goes on in the ocean. Salinity in the bay, the blue line here is Bellport. And this is the hurricane, and it jumped way up, and it has remained high. There was a huge rainstorm, 9 inches in 24 hours, dropped the salinity, and it slowly crawled back. And right now, the salinity in Bellport is about 28 parts per thousand, which is 4 parts higher than historic levels. And that's the story at the moment.
Well, thank you, Charlie, for that scientific prelude. I just want to recognize Michael White, Jr., who's our timekeeper, and Michael's going to make sure that everybody stayed on time. So
2 minutes and 1 minute.
Mike's sending these signals to both the speakers and to the Speaker of the House. So I'd like to pass the floor now over to Professor Clerfield, the Speaker of the House, our moderator.
Well, good afternoon to everybody. It was an interesting presentation that Charlie made. It made me think that sometimes it's better not to have the facts up front. And then as journalists, you always say, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. But I thought that was a fascinating thing to see it as it's evolved. We're going to be debating the question, be it resolved that the Fire Island breach opened by Superstorm Sandy be closed. On the government's team, the Prime Minister is going to be Jeffrey Kassner, who is teaching Long Island Sound Science and Use this semester at Stony Brook. He's also an adjunct assistant professor in biology at Suffolk Community College. He was employed in the town of Brookhaven's Division of Environmental Protection for over 35 years, 10 of which were as the division's director. He has a long-standing interest in natural history and the coastal and land use management of Fire Island, and is the science environmental columnist for the Fire Island Tide. I also should point out he received his master's in marine environmental studies from Stony Brook University. Right to his left, or my left, is the member of the majority, Aram Terchunian, who's a coastal geologist and owner of the first coastal corporation in West Hampton Beach. He specializes, his specialties include coastal flooding and erosion control, wetlands management, coastal regulatory compliance, and endangered species. Aram advises property owners and municipalities on how to enhance and protect their coastal assets. Presently, he is leading a project team in restoring 6 miles of ocean beach in Sagaponack, Bridgehampton, Watermill that were devastated by Sandy. He lives in West Hampton. On my right, we have the leader of the opposition, Carl Christopher Solar. He is the superintendent of the Fire Island National Seashore. He's been in that role since November of 2008. And I should point out now that he's here to express his own personal opinion, not the opinion of the government or the National Park Service. He has worked for the National Park Service since May of 1978. As superintendent, he is responsible for managing the seashore's nearly 20,000 acres, an annual budget of just short of $5 million, and a staff of 100. Since 1978, he has worked at the National Park Service headquarters and field positions as an outdoor recreation planner, providing assistance to state and local government, as a park ranger responsible for planning, land use, and community relations, and as a National Park Service Legislative Affairs Specialist, park manager, and partnership coordinator responsible for policies, program development for the NPS fundraising and development. And then finally we have an old friend, Adrienne Esposito, who's the opposition member. I know her from my days as editorial page editor of Newsday, where she'd come and educate us about what was going on. Adrienne holds a degree in geology and environmental science from CW Post. She's a co-founder of the Citizens Campaign for Environment in 1985, and in 2004 she became its executive director. She has crafted campaigns to engage the public on environmental protection issues, including but not limited to upgrading failing sewage treatment systems, the protection of drinking and surface water, remediation of toxic plumes, stewardship of land and water, support for large-scale renewable energy projects, and reduce pesticides application, and more that I won't even try to mention. She specializes in campaigns to protect groundwater bays in the marine environment. So we have a distinguished panel. I want to thank them all for taking the time out to come here this afternoon, and we're ready to start the debate. If the Prime Minister will take the stand. You'll have 7 minutes, and we'll indicate to you when you have, 2 minutes, 1 minute, and then off.
Thank you so much. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that you got a warning from the National Hurricane Center that in 72 hours a Category 5 hurricane would come and make landfall in your community. If you were a prudent person, you would take some time to storm-proof your house to the best that you could. You'd probably go out and get fuel for your generators and food so you had sufficient supply. Even though you know that there's a certain amount of uncertainty when it comes to the prediction of hurricane landfalls and how strong they're going to be. Well, if the hurricane strikes and you're prepared, you say, boy, I really did a good job. I anticipated something in spite of the uncertainty, and I responded, and I have reduced the damages to my property. I've protected my family, protected my investment. And even if the hurricane doesn't strike your property, takes another path, right? You can still look back and say, well, you know, I acted smartly because there is this risk. It is inevitable. Because we all know, living on Long Island, that it's not a matter of if a hurricane will hit, but it is a matter of when. And that, my friends, sums up the reasons why we believe that the breach should be closed, and it should be closed now. Because we know, as the distinguished Professor Flagg noted, that this is a very dynamic situation out there. It changes from month to month. We believe that these changes could result in the flooding of the mainland. We believe that these changes in the interaction of the inlet with Fire Island will disrupt the flow of sediment along the barrier island. And this will have significant consequences for the stability and the survival of the barrier island. And should this barrier island be destabilized and start to break apart because of this new instability, we're going to put the entire South Shore of Long Island at risk. We believe that there may be downdrift erosion that will adversely impact the communities to the west of the breach. We also believe that keeping the breach open is the wrong way to protect Gulfport Bay and to improve water quality. Because we're not dealing with the cause, we're dealing with a symptom. And if we're using this as our rationale to keep it open, we're going back to the failed policies of 100 years ago, where we all believed that the solution to pollution was dilution. And we know that that is a failed policy when it comes to protecting our environment. And let's make one thing certain. This is not a natural barrier island system anymore. Right? Some may argue, well, it's, has a lot of natural attributes, but the entire south shore of Long Island has been interfered with by a number of projects. We have the groins at West Hampton that periodically make the news. We have the stabilized inlets at Shinnecock and Riches. We have disturbed the natural balance on Fire Island. And this, in turn, could have contributed to the formation of the breach. And so, our issue is one of uncertainty. We don't know how it's going to evolve. Now, there's been modeling, and again, my esteemed colleague from SOMAS shows rather nicely what has been happening out in Belport Bay and at the breach. But monitoring is not predictive. Monitoring tells you what has happened, not what will happen. There's been no modeling of what could happen if this breach expands or how it's going to evolve. And so we have to deal with the fact that, like you in that hurricane, we are dealing with an uncertain condition. And all it takes is one storm. And certainly Superstorm Sandy, which formed the breach, was an unpredictable event. It could happen again. And if it happens again when the breach is open, we have no idea what's going to happen. And so, because of this uncertainty, it is incumbent upon the government to act by what is known as the Precautionary Principle. Because in the face of uncertainty, the fact that that uncertainty can cause egregious harm to the communities along the South Shore bays of Long Island, and also to the communities on Fire Island, we must act on that. And the only way that we can act on that is to make sure that the public is protected, and that means that the breach must need to be closed. Furthermore, it is up to our opposition, who I respect very much, that they need to demonstrate that keeping the breach open will not cause harmful impacts. They may talk about all these wonderful benefits, but the benefits do not outrisk the uncertainty.
Well, what's it going to cost, though?
It will cost what it costs. And just like we buy insurance, we hope we don't need insurance, but we buy it because of the precautionary principle. And the precautionary principle dictates a lot of the things that we do in this world. Let me call into fact what we're trying to do with reducing CO2 in the environment. Right? There is uncertainty. Right? But yet, because we believe that the consequences of a global climate change induced by elevated CO2 will harm the environment, we're taking proactive action now. We're not going to wait, because if we wait, and this has been clearly demonstrated in study after study, that it will be too late. We don't want to wait too late. When people are harmed because we did not act, it's too late. You can't go back and change the hands of time. And let me just reiterate, uncertainty is going to increase with the passage of time. As global climate change changes, our temperatures, rises sea levels, and so forth. We're talking about increasing uncertainty. So the past is really not a prologue for what's going to happen out on the breach. We must immediately close it because it's good planning, it protects, it will be cheaper. And even if we decide to close it, it will still take 3 or 4 or more months to make it happen. So even if we make the decision, we're still going to be vulnerable. And my friends, we need to protect ourselves and our fellow residents from this uncertainty. Thank you.
We'll now hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
If you want to use
Chris
the
Dahl.
microphone.
I think I can. Before I begin, I have to reiterate that I am not here representing the National Park Service or the U.S. government or the Department of the Interior. I'm here as a guest to these gentlemen and have been assigned the position I'm taking, so I'm presenting it from that point of view. I have to tell you that other colleagues that were asked to do this from the federal government were told they were not allowed to come and speak today because it would indicate a position. This is not a position on my part or my agency. So with that, I will now begin. So good afternoon, welcome. I'm here to discuss the reasons that we should leave the breach alone. Fire Island is part of a dynamic barrier island system off the south shore of Long Island. This is part of the larger barrier island system along the Atlantic seaboard of North America, the United States. Barrier islands are dynamic environments that are constantly changing due to seasonal changes in wind directions, tidal prisms, water temperatures, and storm events. Most changes occur, though, from those normal actions of changing seasons. In the summertime, we have southwesterly winds. In the wintertime, they come out of the northeast. The island erodes, the island builds up. It's a common process. It happens every year. The barrier islands are protective features for the mainland of the Atlantic coast, and when there are storms, barrier islands and the bays and marshes behind them absorb storms. That's what they're designed to do. Since European settlement on Long Island and the mapping of the barrier island system, there have been numerous events that have caused the openings and closings of inlets along the barrier island reach from Fire Island Inlet to Shinnecock Inlet. Early maps of Fire Island identify a number of inlets along the Fire Island reach. There is some question as to whether an early map's title called the area 5 islands as opposed to Fire Island. Breaches and inlets have been common in this area since records have been kept. A 1931 nor'easter created Moriches Inlet, and the hurricane of 1938 opened up Shinnecock Inlet. In 1938, Moriches Inlet was armored to create a permanent navigation channel.
I object on a point of fact.
Yes.
Moriches Inlet actually closed in the 50s. It was artificially reopened, and at that point in the early 50s, it was stabilized by the construction of jetties.
I'll agree. All right, I'll accept your position. The dynamic system of inlets and islands is in a constant state of change and flux. Since 1938 or later, the desire has been to maintain a fairly static environment with 3 inlets, Fire Island, Moriches, and Shinnecock. Since then, several storms have resulted in breaches and overwashes of the barrier chain, challenging the desire for a static system. Breaches and overwashes are natural events that are critical to the stability of barrier islands. I would challenge that maintaining the system has also resulted in the barrier islands becoming less effective as storm protective measures. The storm events allow the movement of large quantities of sand to be pushed onto the barrier island or moved over and across the island and into the back bays behind the island. The sand shoals and flats that are created when there are breaches and overwash events provide needed nourishment to the barrier system and the marshes and wetlands in the bay. Maintaining the system now that prevents breaches and overwashes doesn't allow for that nourishment to occur on the back side of the barrier or to elevate the barrier. The system of marshes on the backside, on both the backside of the bay, of the barrier islands, as well as the south shore of Long Island, provide natural protective features during storms. Together with the barrier island, the marshes absorb the impact of storms. Climate change has been going on as long as the Earth has existed. Breaches and overwash events provide badly needed sand to help stabilize and build up the barrier system and the bay marshes to ward against a rising sea. Hurricane Sandy, which many people said devastated Fire Island, it may have knocked down the dunes, but it pushed all that sand into the middle of a sinking island, elevating the island in some places 3 feet. Low-lying areas are now higher to be able to withstand future sea level rise. Breaches and inlets have also been important for maintaining the health of the bays between Long Island's barrier islands and the south shore of Long Island. Breaches allow for needed flushing of the bays as well as an outlet for higher tidal events during and post-storms. Storms bring higher water levels, as Charlie Flagg showed you. It wasn't just because of the breach that there were higher water levels in the Great South Bay. There are higher water levels up and down the entire Atlantic coast, whether there were breaches or not. In fact, the area in Lindenhurst and Babylon has had increased tidal levels for months. However, Bellport Bay, the levels have reduced and are back to where they were pre-Hurricane Sandy. So the breach, in and of itself, is not what causes the higher water levels. It's the storm events that bring the higher water levels. And we are not talking about preventing storms. We're talking about closing a breach to maybe reduce risk. Automatically closing breaches or inlets to prevent risk does not allow for the important benefits that breaches, overwash, and natural inlets can provide to the long-term health and stability of the barrier island, bay and marsh system that provides natural protection to the mainland. That concludes my comments.
Thank you. Now hear from the member of the government constructed.
Ladies and gentlemen, the policy of closing breaches in the barrier island system is long established in the government. It has been highly researched, beginning after the 1992 storms, and became the policy of this government in 1994. This policy has been implemented many times and has saved lives and prevented damage. The opposition now wants to abandon this science-based policy for some philosophy that let's have a natural system. And we, as the government, say that's reckless. And as the government, we have a responsibility to everyone to, number one, protect their lives. And number two, to protect their environment. And what the government says is, let's protect everyone first. Because for someone to tell you that leaving a breach in a barrier island is not going to increase the threat of flooding on the mainland is the same as saying opening a door in winter won't make your house cold. It has to. There is no escape. Every study, every analysis, every computer model has indicated that when you have a breach in the barrier island, you increase the threat of flooding on the mainland. This was demonstrated terribly in the communities of Remsenburg after the '92 breach in West Hampton Dunes. It was that tragedy that brought the government to the policy we have today. And I would point out that after Sandy, 2 of the 3 breaches that occurred in the system were closed. One at Mauritius on the eastern side of the inlet, one on the western side of the inlet. And because they were done expeditiously, and because they were done when equipment was in the area to work, the government got a very good deal. Now, it may have cost millions of dollars, but the people were made safe. Now, because of this reckless act of the opposition, we have a situation where our population of 1 million people on the South Shore of Long Island and the infrastructure of hospitals, Good Samaritan Hospital is in the floodplain. If we have increased flooding, where are we going to take our people that are injured? Okay? So what we need to do is to strengthen our barrier island system. What we need to do is to compensate for the processes that have been interrupted by human activity. Yes, we admit that humans have made errors. But when you recognize an error, which is creating an inlet that interrupts the natural system, by bypassing sand around that system, or by providing nourishment sand for the backside of the island to keep it broad. What you don't do is ignore all science in order to make a cheap political point.
Has any research been done to look at alternative ideas to, instead of jumping to conclusions, to close the breach, to help to the environment as well as the people?
Absolutely. In 1994, the government entered into a task force with the best scientific minds and policymakers in the state. They developed a 2-volume report which is available for everyone to read. And their finding was maintain the integrity of the barrier island system. Since then, there have been dozens of studies that show maintaining the viability of the Barrier Island system is the #1 priority and must be upheld. When it comes to water quality, what we need to do is to correct the errors that we have made there. What we should never do is attempt to benefit one group at the expense of another. It's an attempt to place the burden of responsibility and the risk of damage on one group so that we can make the water cleaner. No, no, no. It is the policy of this government that if we are polluting, then we will correct the pollution. So I say to you, ladies and gentlemen, do not be deceived by the philosophical phrases of the opposition. Understand that our policy at the government is science-based. That every action that we're taking is something that has been painstakingly researched by the finest scientific minds, and not just in our state, but throughout the country. And that when we have an issue, such as water quality, it is our obligation to go to the source of that issue, not to attempt to solve it some other way. Dr. Flagg's wonderful work showed that after Sandy and the breach in the island, two very, very important things. Number one, salinity has stayed higher. Well, the salinity comes from the Atlantic Ocean. And the only way for the salinity to stay elevated is for more ocean water to come into the bay.
Salinity actually dropped after a 9-inch rain event.
And went right back up again. Look at the slide. Number two, what you saw was directly behind the breach in Bellport, during the storm, the tides were super elevated. Why? Because there was a giant hole in the barrier island.
So
and those tides and waves were able to go all the way in, farther into the bay, and to raise the flood elevation directly behind the breach. Precisely what happened in West Hampton and Remsenburg, precisely what happened in Moriches Bay during Superstorm Sandy, in the community of Mastic and Mastic Beach, which were devastated because the barrier island breached, where thousands of homes were impacted. And what every computer model that's ever been done on any barrier island system has shown will happen. We cannot afford the luxury of allowing philosophy to dictate our actions.
Is plugging every breach the solution to rising sea levels?
We are not here to talk about rising sea level. We are here to talk about the protection of lives because of a breach in the barrier island. Responses to rising sea level are multiple, and they are themselves the subject of an intense analysis right now. And that is the place we must look at this in a very specific manner. Do not allow yourself the luxury of saying, nature will take care of it. No, folks, we have interfered. And with that interference comes a responsibility. This government understands that responsibility and will stand up and do the right thing. We ask the support of the people in the community. Help us do the right thing. Because I say to you, the cost of inaction far exceeds the cost of action.
Do you support closing the other inlets?
I do not support closing the other inlets.
Why does the government agency FEMA?
Well, let's hold the questions for a while. Quick comments, but not long questions.
Could you just qualify the statement of that it was a high tide? What did you mean by that with Sandy? What do you qualify that to?
What I am saying is that the surge in the bay at Bellport, directly behind the breach, was higher than the areas east and west of it because it was directly behind the breach.
Okay, it's not open for debate now.
Okay.
Wait,
All right, there'll be questions at the end.
Thank you.
Okay.
Time, please.
15 seconds.
Ladies and gentlemen, the government has a science-based policy. We look for your support. We are here to take the prudent measure, not to fool you with fancy words.
The member of the opposition, Adrienne Esposito. He has 8 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, back to reality now. When someone starts out a speech and says to you, let us assume for the sake of argument, stop right there. And when someone says to you, Government has long established this policy. I say to you, yes, for too long. When someone says to you, government's policies are based on science, yes, sometimes it's science from the 1950s. Let us look at the facts, shall we? Let's do that. First off, when someone says to you, well, we need to close that breach because we need to maybe protect the mainland from perhaps a storm or a hurricane. Yes, storms and hurricanes are going to happen. We're an island. But those same people are not saying to you, we should close Jones Inlet. We should close Shinnecock. We should close Mauritius. We have inlets. And in fact, we make them deeper. In fact, we've been dredging Jones Inlet, you might not know this, to the tune of about 636,000 cubic yards of material from March 2013 to this year. We made it deeper, 14 to 16 feet, and took out material in order to allow greater navigation and greater water exchange. We make Mauritius Inlet wider and deeper. We dredge Shinnecock Inlet. And does anybody cry out, save the mainland? No, they do not. Why is that? Because they know we need those inlets. And then we have little old New Inlet. Very small in comparison to the other inlets. And what do? We say, there's the culprit, my friends. Close it. But we need to have cooler heads and science prevail. Chris Kohler, he is speaking for himself. Oh, and I want to add, I am not speaking for myself only. I'm speaking for the 80,000 people that are members of Citizens Campaign for the Environment. I'm not here representing an issue. I am here really believing and understanding, and we are committed to keeping the breach open. So, what does the breach do for us that's good? Well, I'm glad you asked. What the breach does is that it allows for the natural processes to make the barrier island stronger. Yes, that's right, stronger. If the barrier island doesn't allow for sand to go through and come into the bay, it becomes thinner and thinner, making it more and more fragile. That sand also allows for wetlands to grow. Also, this is very critically important. When we have greater tidal exchange, we're allowing the pollution to go out into the ocean and allow for cleaner water in that bay. When that nitrogen loading leaves that bay, the wetlands grow their roots deeper. This is very important. When wetlands have deeper roots, it makes them stronger and more resilient, which means they protect us from those tidal surges, from those storms, from those winds, and from increasing global climate change. Yes, we are here to talk about that because the breach is, in fact, helping us become more resilient as an island and more sustainable. So greater wetland capacity, greater sand in the bayside, greater water exchange. And no, we are not advocating that the solution to pollution is dilution. We would never do that.
You just did.
Thank you for that clarity. I'm going to put clarity on that there, Chief. What we're saying is that the problem in the bay is so big. I should know. I've been studying it for 10 years, and some of you many more years longer. Some of you maybe too long. But what we have here is a bay system that has excessive nitrogen loading. Septic discharge is going into our bays, sewage discharge into our bays, nitrogen is building up. The most critical thing happening to our bay's ecology right now is what's called toxic tides. We have brown tides, we have red tide, we have rust tide, we now even have blue-green algae in some of the areas. We have every color under the sun. No, it's not a rainbow to be loved. It is actually tides that are coming in and killing the fish, threatening wildlife, threatening human life, and certainly threatening our ecosystems and the growth of our seagrass. So with the nitrogen being able to escape, it's helpful. Yes, we absolutely need to find a greater conclusion to that problem and remedy to that problem, but that's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take money, it's going to take time, it's going to take technology, and it's going to take a lot of political will and public engagement and public support behind that. And we're working on that. We are doing that. I'm sure you've seen the news, which we won't go into. So what does the inlet do? It allows for a cleaner bay. It allows for a stronger wetlands. It allows us to be protected against tidal surges. It allows us to have a natural process that's occurring. Keep in mind, this is a small inlet. This is small compared to the big inlets we already have, and we keep digging out, and we say that we need and that we ignore. I want to also tell you that when someone says, well, the salinity only comes from the ocean, therefore the ocean's coming in. But yes, the ocean comes in and then it goes out again. Salinity is not a factor of tide depth. Salinity is about mixing, not about tide increase. There's a difference. In conclusion, I'm just going to say this. Good science plus good common sense yields good policy. We have science that has been presented to us from state-of-the-art technology, current science. It's not old. It's telling us this small little inlet is not increasing tides across the South Shore. The tides across the South Shore are the same or comparable to all along the Northeast. Clearly, New Inlet is not causing an increase in tide in Vermont or Massachusetts or, wherever. So we have to be rational about this. We have to use our common sense as well. How much does it cost to close the inlet, somebody asked, and they wouldn't answer you? I'll answer you. Right now, the estimate is $20 million. I can tell you we have much better things to do with $20 million than to close New Inlet. Much better things. For one thing, we could put that $20 million to work on fixing the solution to this pollution. Thank you. Oh, wait, one more thing. I can say this too. I have time, right?
You got a minute and a half.
A minute and a half, my God.
That's forever.
That's forever for me. I can say a lot in a minute and a half. So when someone says, it's philosophy, it's not science, I have to say, you've got to come into the millennium there. Because here's a letter written in March of 2013, signed not by 20 philosophers, but rather 20 different PhD coastal scientists, marine scientists, coastal geologists, who all sent a letter concluding, in light of all of the facts, inlets that are formed naturally should be allowed to remain open wherever possible. Not a philosophical stance, but rather a scientific stance. Because we do live on an island. And even though someone said earlier that if you think it's natural, it's not, it is. And if we think we're going to man-make and we're going to fix everything that Mother Nature has to throw at us, we're out of our minds, because we're not. This is a small inlet. It's allowing tidal exchange. It's allowing the water to be cleaner and clearer. And just on a personal note, I'll tell you, and we were talking about this earlier, the folks who work in my office, we got more phone calls from members of the public last year on this issue than any other issue. A man called me and said, I just want to tell you, I drove over the Smiths Point Bridge, and I looked at the water, and I had to keep driving over it because I couldn't believe what I saw. Thank you.
For those of you who are standing, there are seats on the sides up front if you want to see.
All the way up front.
Don't be shy. All right, now we're going to hear from the leader of the opposition for a rebuttal.
When we heard a discussion about government policy, the other piece of the government policy that was left out of that conversation was the fact that the location of the breach is in federal wilderness. Federally designated wilderness that the U.S. Congress has established, and what the Congress has called wilderness is a place that is to be left untouched by man.